I did not scream or hit the mahogany table when they slid the termination agreement toward me. I just nodded, pulled my Mont Blanc pen from my blazer, and signed. They thought they had slashed a massive payroll expense to make their quarterly reports look perfect. They had no idea that in exactly 72 hours, their billion-dollar medical transport network would freeze, and the smug vice president smiling at me would be begging me to save his career. Hello to all our wonderful listeners of the Boss Revenge Stories channel. I want to sincerely share that YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep producing the content you love. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon, where you can listen to exclusive, longer, and incredibly detailed true stories with multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot make public here. You can join us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the pinned comment. Now, let us dive into today's story of corporate betrayal and absolute vengeance. My name is Harper Kennedy, and I am 34 years old. If you walked past the glass corner offices of Vellum Dynamics on the top floors, you would see polished executives tossing around empty phrases like synergistic alignment and dynamic scalability. They wear imported Italian suits, sip artisanal oat milk lattes, and pat themselves on the back for managing a multi-billion-dollar medical logistics empire. But they do not actually keep the company alive. We do. I run a tightly knit, 5-person special operations team out of a subterranean basement that smells faintly of ozone, burnt electrical wire, and stale floor wax. My squad consists of Matteo, Chloe, Elias, Sarah, and Wyatt. We do not have panoramic city views, catered lunches, or ergonomic mesh chairs. What we have is a bank of glowing monitors and the crushing responsibility of ensuring that every single donor heart, frozen vaccine, and fragile vial of rare blood makes it across the country without dropping a single degree in temperature. We are the ultimate guardians of the cold chain, and the weapon we use to protect it is a system called Aegis. Aegis is an automated routing platform I built entirely from scratch. It is a masterpiece of predictive logistics, capable of rerouting a refrigerated transport truck carrying lungs for a transplant around a sudden blizzard in Colorado or a massive traffic pileup in Texas, all in real time. It is the invisible, beating heart of Vellum Dynamics. It saves this company over $40 million in medical waste every single year. Yet, if you asked any of the senior vice presidents about Aegis, they would probably blink at you in absolute confusion. To them, my platform simply does not matter because it does not have a sleek, flashy user interface. It lacks trendy Silicon Valley buzzwords like artificial intelligence or blockchain ecosystem. It just works, silently and flawlessly, keeping their profit margins fat and their hands impeccably clean. Because we operated in the damp shadows of the corporate hierarchy, my team bonded like frontline soldiers in a muddy foxhole. We survived on a brutal cocktail of black coffee, stubborn pride, and sheer adrenaline. I have honestly lost count of the nights we stayed up until 4 a.m, smashing out lines of code in a caffeine-induced delirium while passing around boxes of cold pepperoni pizza. We were a family forged under the intense, terrifying pressure of knowing that a single server crash could cost someone their life on an operating table thousands of miles away. Matteo could fix a catastrophic database error completely blindfolded. Chloe could optimize server loads faster than anyone I had ever met in the industry. Elias, Sarah, and Wyatt monitored the national grid with the intensity of air traffic controllers. We were a perfectly tuned machine, vastly superior to the corporate parasites living above us. But surviving in that basement required much more than just technical brilliance. It required ruthless survival instincts. 3 years ago, I marched upstairs and laid out a comprehensive, data-backed proposal to upgrade the Aegis infrastructure. The system was handling 10 times the volume it was originally designed for, and we desperately needed a server expansion to prevent a system-wide failure. The board of directors barely looked at my presentation. They rejected the budget request outright, pompously claiming they needed to allocate those funds to a new corporate rebranding campaign. They essentially told me to keep the machine running with duct tape and prayers, completely disregarding the human lives at stake. They left me with zero options. So, I took matters into my own hands. I executed a very quiet, highly classified legal maneuver to ensure my project would survive the incompetence of my own bosses. It was a flawless failsafe, a hidden trapdoor built into the very foundation of the software licensing that not a single person in the executive suite even knew existed. I did exactly what I had to do to protect my team and the vulnerable patients relying on our system. For 3 years, that secret remained perfectly buried. Aegis kept humming along in the dark, routing millions of life-saving deliveries without a single glitch. We were the ghosts holding up an empire. Everything was stable, balanced, and perfectly fine. Then, the greedy whispers started echoing down the ventilation shafts. Velum Dynamics was preparing for a massive initial public offering. The board wanted to go public and cash in their equity for mega yachts and private island estates. But to make the financial prospectus look irresistible to Wall Street investors, they needed to scrub the company clean. They needed a fresh, aggressive executive board to push a false narrative of modern corporate transformation. They wanted to trim the fat, consolidate power, and look like disruptive visionaries. They started replacing the old guard with ruthless corporate sharks, completely unaware that their shiny new executives were about to walk straight into my basement and try to dismantle a live bomb. The inevitable byproduct of corporate restructuring is the arrival of men who wear perfectly tailored suits but have absolutely no idea how a business actually functions. Enter Marcus Thorne. His official title was Vice President of Global Optimization, a completely meaningless string of words that perfectly matched his personality. Marcus was the kind of megalomaniac who treated every hallway conversation like a keynote speech. You could always tell when he was approaching, because the suffocating stench of his overpowering sandalwood cologne would seep into the ventilation system a solid minute before he walked through the door. He did not speak in normal sentences. Instead, he communicated entirely through agonizingly hollow business jargon. Every single directive he gave was heavily laced with phrases like disruptive thinking, paradigm shifts, and ecosystem transformation. He was a walking corporate cliché, a sleepwalker in Italian wool who genuinely believed his own delusions of grandeur. It took exactly 4 days for Marcus to set his sights on my department. When he finally descended into our subterranean workspace, he did not ask what we did or how we managed the immense load of the routing grid. He simply looked at the heavy-duty cooling fans, sneered at our battered desks, and immediately labeled us as a problem. In his first email to the upper management suite, which one of my engineers managed to intercept and read to the rest of us, Marcus described my squad as outdated gatekeepers. He claimed we were a stubborn bottleneck, desperately clinging to obsolete legacy systems that were actively hindering his bold strategic vision for the upcoming public offering. His bold strategic vision, as it turned out, was nothing more than a blatant kickback scheme dressed up as corporate innovation. Marcus announced that we needed to aggressively pivot away from our internal routing platform. He wanted to entirely scrap the system my team had bled for and replace it with a prepackaged, incredibly expensive third-party warehouse management software. It was a bloated, visually flashy application designed for moving pallets of cheap consumer electronics, not highly sensitive biological assets. By a truly shocking coincidence, the vendor selling this massive software package just happened to be an old college fraternity brother of his. Marcus was preparing to authorize a multi-million-dollar software migration simply to funnel corporate funds to his friend, while simultaneously taking credit for modernizing the technology division. I tried to stop him. I requested a direct meeting, bringing thick binders full of concrete logistical data, thermal degradation charts, and historical routing maps. I sat across from him in his pristine, sunlit office and calmly explained the terrifying reality of our daily operations. I told him that medical logistics was not the same as shipping pairs of sneakers. If a server lags for 2 minutes on your friend's software, an emergency transport vehicle carrying a donor kidney gets stuck in a severe traffic gridlock, I said, leaning over his glass desk. If the temperature algorithm miscalculates the route duration by a mere 10%, a shipment of pediatric vaccines denatures and becomes entirely useless. You are playing a very dangerous game with human lives. Marcus did not even look at the data. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, adjusted his silk tie, and dismissed me with a patronizing, arrogant wave of his hand. "You are too deep in the weeds, Harper," he replied, flashing a condescending smile that made my blood run cold. "You are missing the macro-level synergy. We need scalable solutions, not emotional attachments to homegrown science projects. The transition happens at the end of the quarter. Get your team on board, or I will find people who are aligned with my vision." When I refused to quietly submit, Marcus launched a systematic campaign of corporate warfare designed to break me. He started by aggressively slashing our server maintenance budget by 40%, hoping the system would slow down just enough to justify his replacement plan. Then came the bureaucratic torture. He forced my engineers to fill out useless, agonizingly detailed daily progress reports that drained hours of our time. Every minor decision suddenly required his personal approval. Yet he would purposefully ignore my emails for days. He deliberately isolated me, cutting off my access to all upper-level strategic planning meetings and removing me from the critical communication loops I needed to do my job. He wanted to humiliate me into resigning. But I did not quit. My team rallied, absorbing the extra workload, working harder, and completely ignoring his childish power plays. We kept the routing grid flawless despite his constant sabotage. That resilience was the final insult to his fragile ego. Marcus realized he could not intimidate me into leaving, so he decided to forcefully remove me, in the absolute secrecy of his office, completely unaware of the devastating trap he was stepping into. He began drafting my official termination agreement. Marcus genuinely believed that by firing me, he could easily terrify my loyal engineers into submission. He thought he could steal our operating budget, install his friend's useless software, and cement his reputation as a ruthless visionary before the initial public offering. He thought he was orchestrating a brilliant corporate checkmate. He was actually just tightening the noose around his own neck. The storm did not arrive with thunder. It arrived in the form of a mandatory calendar invite sent late Sunday night, demanding our presence at 9 o'clock sharp on Monday morning. The location was a pristine, transparent glass boardroom on the 40th floor. It was a space usually reserved for closing billion-dollar acquisitions, not for discussing the fate of a basement engineering squad. Walking out of the elevator, my team looked entirely out of place. Mateo, Chloe, Elias, Sarah, and Wyatt stood awkwardly on the plush, sound-absorbing carpet, their exhausted eyes blinking against the harsh, unforgiving glare of the floor-to-ceiling windows. The room was designed to make you feel small, suspended high above the sprawling city skyline, surrounded by cold glass and polished steel. It was an execution chamber disguised as modern architecture. Marcus was already there, standing at the head of a massive mahogany table. He was wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit and a smile so intensely artificial it looked like it had been surgically attached to his face. Beside him stood a pale, nervous woman from Human Resources, clutching a thick manila folder as if it were a physical shield against the uncomfortable reality of what was about to happen. "Thank you all for coming up here," Marcus began, his voice dripping with that familiar, sickeningly sweet corporate cadence. "As you know, Velum Dynamics is entering a critical phase of hypergrowth. To achieve our ambitious targets for the upcoming public offering, we must ruthlessly evaluate our internal efficiency. We are initiating a strategic personnel restructuring across several technical divisions to ensure our talent aligns perfectly with our future trajectory." He let the empty words hang in the air for a moment, clearly savoring the tension he thought he was creating. My engineers exchanged confused, highly nervous glances. I did not look at them. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Marcus, observing the arrogant twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Harper," he said, turning his gaze directly to me. The fake warmth vanished from his voice, replaced by a cold, triumphant edge. "Your contributions over the past few years have been noted. However, the scope of our new global logistics matrix requires a leader with a much broader, macro-level vision. We need an architect for the future, not an aging mechanic clinging to the past. Effective immediately. Your position is being eliminated. The human resources representative slid the heavy manila folder across the smooth wood of the table. It stopped precisely in front of me. Silence swallowed the boardroom. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, the kind of absolute stillness that precedes a devastating earthquake. Mateo inhaled sharply, his fists clenching tight at his sides. Chloe stared at Marcus with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. They expected me to fight. Marcus expected me to scream, to demand an explanation, to beg for my severance package, or to throw a spectacular, career-ending tantrum right there in the glass box. He wanted a dramatic show. He wanted the immense satisfaction of watching me break under his authority. I gave him absolutely nothing. I did not gasp. I did not shed a single tear. I did not utter a single word of defense or anger. The absolute silence was my chosen weapon. I slowly looked down at the termination agreement, reading the harsh legal language that officially stripped away my livelihood. Then, I simply looked back up at him and nodded. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer, pulled out my Mont Blanc pen, uncapped it with a soft click, and signed my name on the dotted line in one sharp, fluid motion. I pushed the paper back across the table, placed the cap back on my pen, and quietly stood up. Marcus blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by my complete lack of emotion. His triumphant smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but his enormous ego quickly compensated. He puffed out his chest, turning his attention to the rest of the group with renewed arrogance. Now, regarding the transition period, Marcus announced, clapping his hands together briskly, I expect absolute professionalism from the rest of you. We will be bringing in a team of highly motivated university interns by Wednesday to run the system migration, and you will train them directly. He did not get to finish his sentence. Mateo was the first to move. Without a single word, he calmly reached up, unclipped his plastic employee badge from his collar, and tossed it onto the polished mahogany table. It landed with a sharp clatter that echoed loudly in the quiet room. He reached down, snapped his heavy laptop shut, and stepped away from the table. Chloe mirrored his movements perfectly. She threw her security pass right next to Mateo's, her face completely unreadable. Within 5 seconds, Elias, Sarah, and Wyatt did the exact same thing. A chaotic pile of 5 plastic badges and 5 closed laptops sat abandoned in the center of the expensive boardroom table. Marcus turned a deep, blotchy shade of crimson. The smugness completely vanished, replaced by sudden, furious panic. "What do you think you are doing?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking loudly as his carefully planned restructuring rapidly spiraled out of control. "You cannot just walk out. You have strict employment clauses. You have mandatory transition obligations. If you leave this room right now, I will personally ensure you are blacklisted from every major tech firm in this city. I will sue you for breach of contract." None of them even looked at him. Mateo simply turned his back on the furious vice president, walked over to where I was standing, and held the heavy glass door open for me. We walked out of the boardroom in a silent, perfectly synchronized formation, leaving Marcus screaming idle, desperate threats into the empty air of his glass cage. He genuinely thought he had won. He believed he had successfully purged the stubborn elements of his department and could simply plug cheap student labor into a complex system they did not understand. He had absolutely no idea what he had just unleashed. 20 minutes later, the 6 of us were standing in the vast concrete expanse of the underground parking garage. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The heavy, oppressive weight of vellum dynamics was completely gone from our shoulders, replaced by a sudden, exhilarating sense of freedom. I walked over to my car, popped the trunk, reached inside, and pulled out a chilled bottle of vintage champagne alongside a stack of plastic cups. The loud popping of the cork echoed off the concrete walls like a starting pistol. I poured the bubbling liquid, handing a cup to each of my fiercely loyal friends. They looked at me, a wild mixture of shock, adrenaline, and lingering confusion painted across their faces. I raised my plastic cup toward the ceiling, pointing directly up toward the 40th floor where Marcus was undoubtedly celebrating his hollow victory. A genuine, highly dangerous smile finally broke across my face. "Turn off your phones and enjoy the holidays," I told them, my voice perfectly steady and filled with absolute certainty. They just pulled their own life support. Corporate memory is famously short. In the high-turnover world of enterprise logistics, 3 years might as well be 3 centuries. That was my greatest advantage. To understand the sheer magnitude of the trap Marcus Thorne had just blindly walked into, you have to understand exactly what happened 3 years ago after that board of directors refused to fund my critical system upgrade. When I walked out of that boardroom 3 years ago, I did not just go back to the basement and accept defeat. I knew that without a massive structural overhaul, the Aegis platform would inevitably buckle under the weight of national expansion. I knew that innocent patients waiting for organ transplants would pay the ultimate price for corporate greed. Since Velum Dynamics refused to invest a single cent into saving their own infrastructure, I decided to invest everything I had. I drained my personal savings accounts. I hired a highly specialized corporate attorney operating out of Delaware. Through a complex, perfectly legal series of blind trusts, I incorporated an independent technology shell company named NerveTech Logistics. For the next 6 months, I worked in absolute secrecy. I spent every single weekend and countless late nights completely rewriting the core routing algorithm of Aegis from the ground up. I was meticulously careful. I did not use a single piece of Velum equipment. I coded every single line on my personal computer, inside my own apartment, on my own time, completely outside the legal jurisdiction of my employment contract. Once the architecture was flawless, I formally registered the copyright and patented the predictive thermal routing engine entirely under the name of NerveTech Logistics. The code belonged to me. The true masterpiece, however, was not the software itself. It was the licensing agreement. I quietly approached the lower-level procurement department at Velum Dynamics. I presented NerveTech Logistics as a specialized third-party vendor offering a miraculous software patch that would permanently stabilize their failing network. The cost I offered them an exclusive, enterprise-wide licensing agreement for the unbelievably low price of $1 per year. The procurement managers were absolutely ecstatic. They were completely blinded by the prospect of acquiring a perfect technical solution that cost literally nothing. They did not scrutinize the paperwork. They rushed to sign it, thrilled to present the massive cost savings to their superiors. They completely ignored the dense legal jargon buried deep inside Appendix C, subsection 4. That specific clause contained a brilliantly disguised dead man switch. It clearly stipulated that the $1 perpetual license was a highly conditional beta test agreement. It remained valid strictly on one unalterable condition. NerveTech Logistics' designated technical liaison, Harper Kennedy, had to maintain active, full-time status as an internal supervising employee at Velum Dynamics. The legal language was razor-sharp and entirely bulletproof. It explicitly stated that the moment my employment was severed, whether through resignation, departmental restructuring, or involuntary termination, the charitable license would instantly and irrevocably expire, and upon expiration, Velum Dynamics would automatically be transitioned into an emergency operational continuity tier to prevent immediate system failure. The daily rate for this emergency tier was not $1. The contract legally bound Velum Dynamics to pay an emergency penalty fee of $5 million per day to maintain access to the routing grid. If they failed to pay, or if they attempted to bypass the security protocols, the cryptographic keys authenticating the routing software would automatically revoke themselves, permanently locking the entire network. The contract was filed away in the corporate archives, gathering dust, a dormant virus waiting for the right trigger. Marcus Thorne was a man utterly consumed by his own arrogance and his desperate need to look like a corporate hero. Any competent executive initiating a departmental purge would have ordered a comprehensive legal audit of all existing software contracts before terminating the chief architect. But Marcus was incredibly lazy. He was in such a frantic rush to install his college friend's expensive warehouse software and hide his little kickback scheme that he skipped due diligence entirely. He never asked the legal department to review the vendor files. He just confidently signed his name on my termination agreement, believing he was clearing a path for his own glory. By firing me, he did not just remove an employee, he legally armed a catastrophic financial and technological bomb. Right now, I am sitting quietly on the deep velvet sofa in my living room. The chaotic noise of the city traffic is muffled by the heavy glass of my windows. I raise a heavy crystal glass to my lips and take a slow, burning sip of 20-year-old Kentucky bourbon. The rich, smoky flavor is perfect, matching the deep satisfaction settling in my chest. The only light in the room comes from the massive curved monitor resting on my glass coffee table. I am watching a secure terminal connection linked directly to the NerveTech servers. The encryption protecting this connection is military grade, mathematically impossible for Marcus and his new interns to crack, even if they had a decade to try. In the very center of the black screen, large white numbers are counting down, second by agonizing second, 72 hours. When Velum Dynamics originally installed Aegis, I purposely configured their local servers to hold exactly 72 hours of routing data in their offline cache. It was designed to survive temporary internet outages. Now, it is a countdown to their destruction. When that timer hits 0, their central system will attempt its mandatory security handshake with my servers to refresh the operating license. It will find nothing but a closed door. In exactly 3 days, the cache will run entirely dry, the poison pill will activate, and Marcus Thorne's entire world is going to burn to the ground. The precise mathematical beauty of a countdown is that it shows absolutely no mercy. It does not care about your job title, your expensive suits, or your grand strategic vision. When the final second drops, the hammer falls. At exactly 9 o'clock on Thursday morning, exactly 72 hours after I walked out of that glass boardroom, the local data cache at Velum Dynamics ran completely dry. Across the country, inside 40 massive regional distribution centers, the system initiated its mandatory security handshake. It reached out into the digital void, searching for my external NerveTech servers to validate the operating license. It hit a solid, impenetrable wall of encrypted denial. In perfect, terrifying synchronization, thousands of dispatch monitors from New York to California flickered, froze, and instantly turned a blinding, violent shade of red. A single line of bold white text appeared on every single screen across the entire corporate network. License expired. Access denied. The physical fallout was instantaneous and catastrophic. The invisible arteries of the national medical supply chain completely severed. Hundreds of heavy transport trucks, carrying ultra-sensitive cargo like rare blood types, cryogenic pediatric vaccines, and highly viable frozen organs for transplant, were suddenly paralyzed at highway checkpoints and way stations. Without Aegis actively calculating the real-time thermal degradation routes, adjusting for traffic density, and monitoring the onboard refrigeration units, the drivers were strictly forbidden by federal law from moving another inch. Alarms began to blare inside the truck cabs as internal temperature margins began to dangerously fluctuate. A nationwide logistical stroke had just occurred. Up on the 40th floor, Marcus Thorne was likely taking a sip of his morning espresso when the first wave of emergency alerts triggered a deafening cacophony of sirens throughout the executive suite. The illusion of his absolute control shattered in seconds. Panic consumed him entirely. He abandoned his pristine office and sprinted toward the elevators, descending rapidly into the very basement he had mocked just days prior. He burst through the heavy double doors of the server room, his face completely pale and slick with a sudden, cold sweat. The room was total chaos. The cheap, highly motivated university interns he had hired to replace my veteran squad were running around frantically, staring blankly at the endless sea of red warning screens. "Override the lock," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with sheer terror as he grabbed the nearest intern by the shoulder. Bypass the firewall, reroute the server permissions, and reboot the main operational grid immediately. The terrified intern recoiled, his hands shaking violently as he pointed a trembling finger at the main terminal monitor. "We cannot do anything," the young student stammered, his eyes wide with absolute dread. "This is not a simple password lock. The entire central routing core is completely gone. It is encrypted behind a military-grade cryptographic wall hosted on an independent external server. The host is denying our handshake. We are completely locked out of our own system." Before Marcus could even process the reality of his technological failure, his mobile phone began to ring incessantly. It was the chief procurement administrator for their largest national client, a massive syndicate of primary care hospitals. The client did not ask for a polite update. He screamed so loudly that the interns could hear it echoing from the phone speaker. He informed Marcus that 3 major organ transplant surgeries had just been halted while patients were actively on the operating table because the delivery trucks were stranded on the interstate. The client explicitly threatened to file a $500 million lawsuit for gross negligence and breach of a vital delivery contract by the end of the business day. As Marcus dropped his phone in sheer shock, the heavy doors of the server room flew open again. The chief legal officer of Velum Dynamics stormed into the room. She was a fierce, uncompromising woman who did not tolerate incompetence, and she looked like she was ready to commit a murder. She held a thick stack of papers clutched tightly in her fist. It was the original NerveTech logistics contract, dug out from the deepest layers of the corporate archives. She marched directly up to Marcus and violently slammed the heavy stack of papers squarely against his chest. "You absolute, unmitigated fool," she roared, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Do you have any idea what you just did? Did you even bother to read the vendor agreements before you authorized that termination order on Monday?" Marcus stared at her, his jaw hanging open, completely unable to form a single coherent sentence. "She owned the core algorithm," the legal director screamed, pointing a furious finger at the contract. "Harper Kennedy licensed the entire operational grid to us for $1 single a year, under the explicit condition that she remained an active employee. You did not just fire a mechanic, Marcus, you triggered a poison pill. We are now legally bound to pay a $5 million daily emergency penalty just to turn the lights back on, and the access keys are permanently locked until she grants permission. You just detonated a bomb that is going to destroy this entire corporation." Marcus collapsed heavily into a rolling office chair, the blood draining completely from his face. The crushing weight of reality finally crashed down upon his shoulders. He scrambled for his phone again, his fingers slipping clumsily against the glass screen. He dialed my number. He called me 10 times, then 20 times, then 40 times in a row. He left desperate, rambling, begging voicemails, pleading for me to answer, promising me a massive promotion, offering me absolutely anything I wanted if I would just reset the servers. Every single call went straight to an automated answering machine. All he heard was a series of cold, soulless beeps echoing his total defeat. The situation deteriorated at a terrifying speed. By nightfall, the national news networks were reporting on the massive medical supply chain failure. Velum Dynamics was bleeding millions of dollars by the hour in spoiled inventory and rapid penalty clauses. At exactly midnight, the board of directors initiated a furious, mandatory emergency summons. Marcus was dragged back up to the glass boardroom, a hollow, broken shell of a man. The massive company he had confidently promised to revolutionize was now standing on the absolute brink of total bankruptcy. All because he was too arrogant to realize who was actually running the machine. I walked back into the glass boardroom on the 40th floor at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. The atmosphere was vastly different from Monday. The arrogance had entirely evaporated, replaced by the thick, suffocating stench of absolute desperation. The entire board of directors was assembled around the mahogany table. Their expensive suits were rumpled, their ties were loosened, and their faces were pale with the terrifying realization that their empire was bleeding to death. I did not walk into that room as Harper Kennedy. The dismissed basement engineer. I walked in as the chief executive officer of NerveTech Logistics, the only entity on Earth currently holding Velum Dynamics by the throat. The moment I stepped through the heavy glass doors, Marcus lost whatever shred of sanity he had left. He leaped out of his chair, pointing a trembling finger at me, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. "You are a corporate terrorist," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking violently. "This is blatant sabotage. It is criminal extortion. I will have you thrown in federal prison for the rest of your life. You deliberately destroyed our network." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I walked calmly to the center of the room, reached into my blazer, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I tossed it onto the polished mahogany table. It slid directly in front of the chairman of the board. It was my termination agreement, bearing the bold, undeniable signature of Marcus Thorne. "I did not destroy anything," I replied, my voice completely flat and ice cold. "I simply obeyed the legal mandate of the contract your vice president signed. He terminated the internal supervisor. The system automatically executed the fail-safe protocol exactly as outlined in the vendor agreement. If you want to discuss corporate sabotage, I suggest you look at the man who authorized a system purge without reading a single legal document." The chairman did not even look at Marcus. He was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He looked at me with the exhausted, hollow eyes of a man who knew he had absolutely no leverage. "We do not have time for this," the chairman interrupted, his voice shaking. "We have thousands of critical medical shipments rapidly approaching terminal degradation. People are going to die. Harper, hospitals are drafting lawsuits that will bankrupt us by sunrise. Tell me exactly how much money it will take to unlock the servers right now." I stood at the head of the table, looking down at the most powerful executives in the industry. They were begging me. It was the exact moment I had prepared for. "I have 3 non-negotiable conditions," I stated clearly, letting each word land like a heavy hammer. "First, Velum Dynamics will purchase the Aegis license from NerveTech Logistics outright. The cost is $40 million, wired to my holding account by the end of the business day." A few board members gasped, but the chairman simply swallowed hard and gave a stiff nod. "Second," I continued, "my entire engineering squad is to be immediately reinstated. They will operate with full departmental autonomy, completely free from executive interference. Furthermore, they will receive triple their original salaries as compensation for the hostile work environment they endured." "Agreed," the chairman croaked instantly, not even attempting to bargain. "What is the third condition?" I slowly turned my head and locked eyes with Marcus. He was gripping the edge of the table, breathing heavily, completely paralyzed by the realization of what was coming. "My third condition," I said, a slow, deeply satisfying smile spreading across my face. "Marcus Thorne is to be terminated right here, right now, at this exact table. He will be immediately stripped of all invested stock options and severance packages, and I want corporate security to physically escort him down to his office, watch him pack his desk, and throw him out of the building tonight. I want him gone before I even touch my phone." It did not take the board of directors 10 seconds to make their decision. The chairman gestured to the 2 massive security guards standing near the doorway. "You are fired, Marcus," the chairman said coldly. "Get him out of my sight." Marcus completely collapsed. The arrogant, untouchable executive was suddenly reduced to a weeping, blabbering mess. He tried to grab the table, begging for another chance, pleading that he was only trying to optimize the budget. The security guards did not care. They grabbed him by the arms of his expensive Italian suit and forcibly dragged him out of the boardroom. His humiliating sobs echoed down the quiet hallway until the heavy glass doors swung shut, sealing his fate forever. The room fell into a dead, heavy silence. All eyes turned back to me. I smirked, giving the chairman a single polite nod. I pulled my mobile phone from my pocket, opened the secure NerveTech application, and typed in a 6-digit bypass code. I hit execute. Thousands of miles away, inside 40 frozen distribution centers, the red warning screens instantly vanished. The encrypted locks dissolved. The massive logistical heart of Vellum Dynamics started beating once again. Across the entire country, thousands of heavy transport trucks turned on their headlights and pulled back onto the highways, delivering their vital cargo into the night. I did not walk back to the basement. I pulled out the plush leather chair at the head of the mahogany table, the exact seat Marcus had just been dragged away from, and comfortably sat down. The empire was finally in the right hands. Thank you so much to all of our amazing listeners for tuning in to the Boss Revenge Stories channel today. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please leave a comment below. If you found today's story satisfying and want to support our demonetized channel, please consider joining our Patreon. There, you can listen to our absolute best, highly detailed, exclusive true stories that are too intense to publish publicly on YouTube. You can join by simply scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the pinned comment. Have a wonderful day.